Morning, everyone. Thanks for being here this morning. This is a public hearing, their presentation from CenturyLink. Also take input from the commission members as well as the public regarding a franchise agreement for CenturyLink. Attorney Adrian is running a little late due to car trouble, but he will be here. But I think before we go into the presentation, Mike, you want to just give a brief overview, or you want to wait?
Sure.
Adrian?
Well, what we'll do is, I think what we could do is, this is the first time in 30 years that Adrian's been late, so I think it's okay after 30 years to be late just once. Yes, this is the official public hearing. We do have representatives from CenturyLink here. And I think maybe what we could do is just reverse the order, just maybe have CenturyLink start out and then Adrian just do a little recap after that, and then open it up to the public. So if you would like to introduce yourselves, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tyler Middleton. I'm CenturyLink's Vice President of Operations for Minnesota. Chairman and Commission members, thanks for inviting us here today. We appreciate the opportunity. As Mike just noted, Comcast and its predecessors have had a monopoly on wireline television service in this area for about 3 decades. And today, CenturyLink comes prepared to provide choice and competition to customers in the northwest suburbs Cable Commission area. CenturyLink offers a television service called Prism TV in select markets across the country today. And as you know, we're here in the hopes of bringing Prism to your constituents. Prism is an IPTV service that runs off the Internet Protocol. It provides a very high quality digital picture with over 250 HD channels and features such as picture-in-picture ×4, whole home DVR, what we call warp channel change, which is very, very quick channel change, and even wireless connectivity, which allows you to take your television and move it to your deck or to your garage if you are so inclined. The video content travels CenturyLink's managed two-way IP network and arrives at the customer's home via either a fiber and copper hybrid network, or in some cases, as we're building out newly right now, fiber to the home technology. Prism TV always has the newest technology, and that's because the features are updated automatically to each individual's system. A little background on CenturyLink. We are an $18 billion company in terms of our revenues, and largely considered the 3rd largest telecommunications company in the United States, a Fortune 158 company. We provide traditional voice and internet services to residential customers in 37 states, as well as voice, data, cloud, and managed service offerings to business customers both nationally and internationally through a high-quality advanced fiber optic network. A little closer to home here in Minnesota, we employ about 3,000 people, with the majority of those jobs located here in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. More than half of those employees in the Twin Cities are represented by the Communication Workers of America Union. This represents 500 network technicians, many of which will be specifically trained for the Prism deployment, and we are currently in the process, and in fact have already hired many additional technicians in preparation for this product launch here. We also employ approximately 100 network engineers in this area who work in partnership with the network operations team to plan, build, and deploy the service. In fact, many CenturyLink employees through our predecessor companies, Quest and US West, way back to Northwestern Bell in some cases, have worked for the company for decades, experiencing the early innovations as a telephone company and the current day transformation into a technologically sophisticated service provider to both local communities and Minnesota's largest business customers. Today, CenturyLink currently offers Prism television service in 14 markets across the country, including larger markets such as Phoenix, Denver, and Las Vegas. And here in the Midwest, where we actually started with Prism about 8 years ago, down in La Crosse, Wisconsin, in Omaha, Nebraska, Jefferson City, and Columbia, Missouri. Today, approximately 2.3 million homes have access to Prism, We have more than 300,000 customers across the country, a number that is dramatically growing every day. As you know from our application, bringing CenturyLink's Prism to this market is a very significant investment that our company is making in the technological infrastructure in this area, and CenturyLink employees are ready to deliver the state-of-the-art TV product to the area shortly. Based on our application and the record we'll set today, we are very confident we have the technical, operational, and legal qualifications to deploy services in this area. I'm looking forward to working with all of you to bring choice and competition to this market. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jim Campbell.
Thanks, sir. Thank you again, Commissioners, and Mike, thanks for having us out here. My name is Jim Campbell. I'm the Regional Vice President for Regulatory and Legislative Affairs for the Midwest region. With me from CenturyLink in the back there is Patrick Haggerty, who runs all the regulatory and legislative and local affairs for Minnesota. Kirsten Searslin there is our Director of Local Affairs, and Mary Lefebvre is the Director of Video Policy for another 14 days. Yesterday was 15, now it's 14. She's retiring on May 1st, which is going to make my life much worse. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to come out here and talk to you about the exciting news. As Tyler said, I think the application stands on itself, and we stand ready and capable to bring the services to residents of your city. You know, I know I don't want to steal Adrian's thunder. My guess he would probably be going through some of the state law and some of the federal law, which I'll touch on. And I'll certainly let him make his presentation. But one of the things I think he'd show you is that there's a federal law that says that franchising cannot be exclusive, and regulators such as yourself, you know, are here to ensure innovation, competition, and investment. Unfortunately, that law was passed in 1992. That's when the FCC did away with exclusive franchising. And here we sit 23 years later, and in the Twin Cities there is one franchise cable operator. So let's flip over to the other types of services in this market. You know, telecommunication, which is our core business, where we were the incumbent at one point and had 100% of the market. In 1996, the federal government came in and said, we're going to open up the telecommunications market. And competitive local exchange carriers, companies like Comcast and its predecessors, went to the PUC and said, we want to offer voice services to compete with then it was US West. And the PUC says, that's great. And all the competitors said, the one thing we can't do, we cannot have a government mandated build requirement. We have to be able to let the market control how our services are expanded, because we're a second entrant. Every subscriber we get currently has a relationship with someone else. And the FCC and all 50 PUCs said, we agree with you. Once you get into a competitive-based scenario, the market will control how services are deployed. So fast forward 19 years in the telecommunications market, we have about 24% of the market share. Adrian right there. Adrian, I'm doing your speech for you. No problem. And Mike, I'll defer to you if you want Adrian to go and come back to this. You sure? Okay, that's fine. So here we sit in 2015, US West, which was the equivalent of Comcast, has 24% of the market share. As Tyler said, we're the third largest telecommunications company, but in June, after Comcast merges with Time Warner, he's going to have to change his speech because we're going to be fourth. Comcast Time Warner is actually going to be larger than us on the telecom side, without any government build out, without any mandate. If you take a look at internet, which has exploded over the last 20 years, like telecom, you have dozens of internet providers in the Twin Cities offering innovation, service advancement, and the like without any government mandated build. The market has controlled that deployment. Unfortunately, 23 years later, here we sit and we still only have one cable franchise operator. And so this kind of give you a background, and I'm going to let Adrian go through the federal law. But there's an FCC order that came out in 2007 that we think addresses a state law in Minnesota. So just to kind of backtrack, in the 1980s, the incumbent cable operator here, I don't know who it was back then, and it's been amended from time to time, passed a law, 238084, which requires local franchising authorities to basically impose a 5-year ubiquitous build-out on any cable operator. That was passed with the clear design that any second entrant would never agree to that because it makes no sense. And that was, in a way, passed to protect their franchise and protect their monopoly interest. In 2007, let me backtrack, between 2002 and 2005, AT&T and Verizon, who were then getting into the video market, decided that they were having some trouble at the local level in some states back east. So they began a pretty big push to pass what's called statewide franchising. I'm sure you've all heard of that, where some states, I think 26 or 27 of them, around that number, have actually said we're going to take franchising and we're going to move it to the state level. We're going to put it with the Department of Commerce, the PUCs, whatever state agency. That way, if you want to compete with the incumbent cable operator, rather than negotiating hundreds of franchises, you go get your certificate and you compete. And so the FCC took a look at the competition that was flourishing in those states, states like Nevada, states like Wisconsin, where, as Tyler said, we've launched. And there are multiple providers. For example, in Las Vegas, we have launched Prism service in Las Vegas. There's probably 5 or 6 providers competing with the incumbent down there, Cox Communications. And the FCC said we just don't see that same type of competition in areas where the local government's still regulated. So let's kind of do some research. Let's create a record, have people come in and testify and see why that is. And the 2 biggest issues they found that were kind of inhibiting competition in those areas was, 1, the timing to get franchising, and 2, the build-out requirements. So a second entrant would come in and say, I want a cable franchise, and the local operators say, you have to build out within 5 years like the incumbent did, and no second entrant in their right mind is ever going to agree to that. You're not going to agree to spend $500 million or commit that type of capital before you have 1 subscriber. So the FCC said, we think a reasonable build-out, maybe a reasonable build-out tied to success is appropriate, but to come in and require a ubiquitous build-out in a short time frame is inappropriate. It's clearly a barrier to entry. Then the FCC went on to say, we don't want this order to affect any state law. So if you look at the intent of that order, the idea was those states that had, and if I can use the terms from the order, it says we don't want to affect any state that has, or we don't want it to affect any laws, it's designed to only affect local laws where a state has not, and I quote, specifically circumscribed the local franchising authority's authority. So they clearly meant those states that had pulled franchising authority from the local governments, they did not want to affect those laws. Minnesota is unique to all other states that don't have statewide franchising. You actually have a state law, but it's not a state law that circumscribes your authority. The ability to regulate the video market remains with you. And so all this state law does is direct you to do something as a local franchising authority, and the thing that it directs you to do is the very barrier to entry that the FCC was trying to eliminate. So CenturyLink's perspective, and I'll let Adrian speak to it, this is our perspective, he can certainly speak to it from his, is that the FCC order preempted the state law in Minnesota, and so the 5-year build requirement is not necessary. And that's why we've approached cities with a little different approach. Now, one of the approach we're taking is that we would certainly agree to some minimum build requirement, an initial deployment where we could have a beachhead. Okay, we would get some subscribers and then we would be successful. So as we're successful and as we reach certain penetration thresholds, that would trigger future advancement. That's the way the market works. Second entrants are clearly in a different position. If I can quote the FCC order, and this kind of gives you an idea of what they were trying to eliminate, the FCC stated that ubiquitous build requirements unreasonably impede competitive entry into the multi-channel video marketplace by requiring local franchising authorities to grant franchises to competitors on substantially the same terms. And they go on and say, because a second provider realistically cannot count on acquiring a share of market similar to the incumbent share, although I would argue against that because that certainly happened in our market, the second entrant cannot justify a large initial deployment. Rather, a new entrant must begin offering service within a smaller area and expand off that based on their success. That's what we're proposing to you. Now, Comcast, I know, doesn't want us to come into the market. You're probably going to have a letter. It may be on your desk now. It probably looks a lot like this, and it suggests we're going to redline. It suggests we're going to cherry pick. It suggests we're not going to serve poor areas. And if I may, I've been down this rodeo with Comcast before. If you can see, I have a letter here. This is from the GMTC. It goes back to 2006. Looks a lot like the letter in your packet. This is nearly 10 years ago, And to date, Comcast has yet to provide any evidence that us or any other provider that competes with them has ever redlined, has ever discriminated, has ever not served poor areas. It's simply a red herring argument designed to scare from a policy perspective, and it's clearly designed to keep competition out. Comcast doesn't want us to enter the market, but your residents do. Ultimately, at the end of the day, as regulators, your job is to encourage competition, innovation, investment, jobs, and that's exactly what we're trying to bring. We would obviously want to sit down and negotiate a franchise that contains some minimum initial deployment with further expansion tied to how well we do. And we've done well. As Tyler said, we're pretty new to this business. We passed 2.3 million homes. After just a few years, we're in the 12 to 15% penetration rate. That's pretty good. And the statistics clearly show that if you're looking out for consumers, they're the ones who win with competition. The incumbent cable operators generally behave when you have a wireline competitor. In Minnesota, there isn't one. There hasn't been for 30 years, 40 years. And we're the first ones to bring this opportunity to your desk, and we're probably the last. So again, we appreciate the opportunity. We definitely wanted to tell you kind of what our position is on this as we enter into the negotiations. We look forward to bringing competition. I mean, we've got, Comcast is going to threaten they're going to sue. My perspective, I kind of hope they do, because from a PR perspective, having an incumbent sue the regulator to keep competition out is a good headline for second entrants. If they do, we will indemnify you. We've passed 40 of these franchises in Comcast territories across the country with very similar provisions, not only in the franchise agreements, competitive equity, the whole bit. They have yet to sue. I can't imagine they would. They might. I hope they do. But in any event, at the end of the day, you don't need to look at whether Comcast is upset, whether CenturyLink is happy. The real issue is whether consumers are benefiting from investment, competition, and innovation. So with that, I will turn it over, Mike, to any questions you might have. And again, I appreciate you letting us go out of order.
Mr. Chair, we'll pass it on to Adrian for his presentation, and then Comcast, if Comcast would like to make a response.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm sorry to be late after 40 years of representing this commission. This is the first meeting I've been late to. The car wouldn't start, of all things. I didn't hear all of his presentation, but there certainly is a lot of law issues that are involved in this. There's no question but that what we call the franchising orders of the Federal Communication Commission in 2007, and then again modified in early this year, are intended to encourage competition and to strip down some of the barriers that have prevented competition from occurring. Just by way of background up here, you'll see on the slide presentation, and for everybody's benefit, that the public that's here, the Northwest Commission is a joint powers commission. Minnesota law is somewhat unique. It allowed, under the law, two choices, one of which would be individual cities could combine together and be the franchising authority, or it allowed a joint powers commission, if authorized by their member cities, to be the franchising authority. In this case, the Northwest Commission is a commission that has a franchising authority on behalf of all 9 cities, and is very unique in this entire metropolitan area because of this. So the commission itself can award a franchise in accordance to the applicable law, requirements under the franchise ordinance that you have, and comparable requirements to the existing franchise that Comcast has. There are some things that are very important, I think, is that when you talk about build out and area served, one thing that's stressed under Minnesota law is you have to assure access to cable services to everyone. You can't deny service to a group of potential residential subscribers because of income of residents in the local area in which such group resides. On to the next slide. CenturyLink has expressed interest in providing cable service to the residents of the member cities, and that's true throughout this entire metro area. At the last meeting, we discussed the fact that a number of us, I think the cable administrators and the attorneys in the metro area, compare notes, have discussed the issues, and then we've each kind of gone on our own way because each individual group has their own requirements. I think the important thing to understand is that the existing franchise of Comcast is not exclusive. And that means under Minnesota law, the federal law, and all legal requirements, a competitive service provider can provide service, and you do have the authority to review their franchise to determine whether or not such franchise can be granted. Go on to the next slide. In this case, we followed the Minnesota law. The statute is cited up there. And I think what he was just mentioning is very true. Minnesota statute has the Cable Act, which interestingly enough was the act that was followed by Congress when it passed the Cable Act way going back to the early 80s, 1982 or 1983, I think it was 84. Okay. At any rate, it establishes all the procedures and requirements for the granting of a franchise, including publishing notice, which we've done. On behalf of this commission for this public hearing, notice has been published in the newspapers for all your communities. The deadline for applications was March 18th. The only applicant was CenturyLink, and this is a public hearing that was advertised. So it's a public hearing. People generally from the public will have the opportunity to make comments, and the public hearing remains open for comment through Friday of this week.
So, yeah. That's everything.
The application made by CenturyLink is very detailed. Its response to the information is requested by the commission, follows the requirements under Minnesota law. And I might just say, based on past experience in working with your staff and the executive committee, we put together a very detailed application form. The rules of the Federal Communication Commission actually establish a form for an applicant that is seeking to get a franchise. And we thought by making a lot more comprehensive form, application form, to get all the questions on the table at the beginning so there wouldn't be a back and forth kind of negotiation, having an applicant provide all of that information, as much information at the front end with her application in a very detailed way, would make this process a lot more expeditious and helpful, and reduce the amount of going back and forth and hopefully the amount of negotiation that would have to occur. And I might say at the beginning here that the application that they've submitted was done very well. They highlighted matters very clearly. So we do know at this time, and we'll be discussing in great detail with the executive committee in the process going forward, what are the issues and differences that we see need to be dealt with and negotiated between CenturyLink and the commission. The application and written materials includes an application, franchise application, public, non-public response to commission's information request, conducting a presentation, which they're doing here today. The commission members and the public will have the opportunity to comment. The incumbent franchise cable operator, Comcast, can also comment. And I think it's already been stated here by Mike, and I think it was included in the agenda. It wasn't a very detailed letter from Comcast, so we do know what their position and what some of their questions are that need to be made part of this public hearing process. The public hearing is going to be closed after the commission and public comments are made during the public hearing. And it will remain open for any further written comments until 4 o'clock Friday, April 24th. Prior to the May 21st meeting, the commission meeting, the executive committee is going to meet to evaluate the application to determine whether or not it's complete. And what it boils down to is the way the law works, especially the rules of the Federal Communication Commission are that there are certain time periods that will trigger negotiation. And that depends on whether they're already providing service in a community or whether they're not, or whether they're a new provider. There could be a 90-day period of time for negotiation or a 6-month period of time. But before any negotiation starts, you, the commission, have the right to determine that their application is complete, that they fully address all the questions and issues, and provided all the information that's required. So the May 21st meeting really boils down to, based on a review and further discussion with your executive committee to help you, we'll be coming back with a report recommending that the application is complete, and if it's complete, that will then trigger either a 90 or 6-month period of time within which to negotiate a finalized new franchise agreement. And then at the May 21st meeting, the commission will direct the negotiating committee to negotiate the terms of the franchise. Are there any questions?
We have a representative from Comcast with us this morning. Carly, did you want to provide any?
Excuse me, thank you, Chair. No, we'll limit our participation to the letter of file.
Okay, all right. Okay, input from the commissioners. I don't think we have anybody from the public that's with us this morning. Bill?
When I, as a part of the executive committee and the negotiating committee, evaluate your application, the things that I'm concerned about so far aren't that you're legally, technically, and financially able to do this. It's, I don't know what your attitude is going to be. So far, it seems to me that it has been, this is the way we do it as part of our cookie cutter technique, that we only have so much money, and I can understand this from a business point of view, it makes sense. We only have so much money, so if you don't go by what we say, we'll go somewhere else. So it makes me feel good that you're doing Minneapolis. It makes me feel good that maybe you have a head end in Golden Valley and that you really want to do here. I'm worried when we get there, and I'm not saying that this is your attitude, but I'm worried so far that when we get to the negotiation process, you're going to say in Omaha, in Denver, wherever else, we have this template that says in order to build out completely, we have we need 27.5% penetration or something like that. That's your template. And I'm worried that those penetration rates or the standards that you create in order to go to the next step, because you did say here today that we certainly would agree to some build-out agreement that triggers future advancement. I'm worried that those will be penetration rates or build-out requirements that are not practical or something that we're going to end up meeting. I'm worried that you're not, there's a 5-year build-out requirement with this particular law and this particular franchise. And I understand that the second person in, and by the way, if you commit to building out fully, I will sign up. So from now on, you're going to have to say before we have 2 customers, because you're going to get some customers right off the bat. So I'm worried about that. I'm worried that that's what's going to be the attitude, take it or leave it. So I hope you don't do that. I suspect you're not going to. At some point in time, I'll ask you, can you commit to a 50-year build out, which seems kind of ridiculous, you might not be around here in 50 years. But I suspect that the
At 48 years old, I can sign that.
Okay. So and then, of course, I'm going to try to go down and down and down.
I understand.
So I'm just worried that there's not going to be any type of a requirement for you to build out the whole situation. I don't get the sense, I've talked to Comcast, I don't get the sense that they think that you're redlining or, that might be somewhere else that they use that tack. I don't get the sense that right now that that's their thing, that you're a redlining, cherry-picking situation. From looking at the maps, I get the sense that you're just going initially where you have customers already. It's got to be some kind of a relationship to your hubs or whatever. I do already think you're legally, technically, and financially capable of doing this. I do think that it's the best thing that we could do to get some competition. So I want to work with you. I think we're going to be flexible, and I hope that you're going to be flexible too.
Commissioner, thank you for those comments. I guess I think you're correct that I think the terms of these, 99% of the terms of the agreement, I think we're probably already there. And, you know, when we talk about negotiation timeframes, obviously we're a little bit different than a Comcast renewal. We have speed to market issues. You know, renewals can take 3 years sometimes to do, but when you're already in the market and selling, I've been on the cable world too. I don't care if they take 3 to 5 years, but when you're a new entrant, you're making an investment, you have a business case that's promised the company units by third quarter, fourth quarter, you know, speed to market is an issue. So obviously, I would request anything we could do to expedite it and move the time frame would be beneficial to us. With respect to your second, yeah, we have negotiated a template that we've used elsewhere. In Phoenix, for example, we get, you know, pure no-build franchises down there. Cox, the incumbent down there, has kind of figured out what they look like standing at the podium asking to keep competition out. The incumbent here hasn't gotten the memo yet. But with respect to the redlining, they actually have accused us of redlining. They filed a letter in the city of Minneapolis and a couple commissions accusing us of redlining in Phoenix with zero evidence. Now, this is a quasi-judicial hearing, and I think to submit a letter accusing us of violating federal law with no evidence is irresponsible and probably fraudulent. So we've asked them to retract that, and they did. Now, this letter does suggest that somehow the deployment will not be compliant with federal law. It's the same, again, it's the same letter they submitted in 2006. The issue we have, and we will be flexible. We have worked with every city in Denver. We've got 8 or 9 franchises down there. There's something unique to every city. With respect to the build, you know, obviously there are things we can look at. The problem we have is I understand that, you know, local franchising is extremely local, and it's very local to your city. But if you're in my chair, we agreed to a no-build franchise in Portland, just a full, because they agreed to a no-build with Google. This is a pure market franchise, and 2 weeks before the city council went to vote, Comcast submits a letter saying, hey, this is what they agreed to in Denver. Why don't you make them agree to it here? So to the extent we move off of the model too much, and I'm just trying to give you our perspective as a company, you know, Comcast will send that to we're probably negotiating right now with 90 cities in which Comcast is the incumbent. We agree to something a little different here, it ends up showing up elsewhere, and then it becomes what I call the ladder approach. You know, the way I explained it in Denver, we're moving from the south to the north. We agree to something in the south, by the time we get to Longmont, we're building out Canada, right? So we've got to be, I appreciate that we need to be flexible, and we will be. We want to work with each of your cities and recognize your local needs. That being said, we have to be a bit careful from a company that every time we set a different precedent, that becomes the floor, and a letter gets submitted here and there and there and there, so we just we stair-step this thing up. And so recognizing your concerns, we will absolutely work with you, but I hope from our perspective you kind of understand that's a risk we take as we move too far off the model. I hope that answers your question.
And I think I would add, one of the things we haven't stated explicitly in this hearing is that in order to provide PRISM service, what it really requires from our perspective, this is kind of a gross oversimplification, but it requires a circuit from us that offers 25 megabits per second or greater. And so we have, to your point of kind of where we build, we have DSL service to the majority of the homes in this cable franchise area already. They do receive a varying speed today because of different generations of technology that were deployed over the many years. So one of the things that we're doing that's part and parcel to this is we are building out this 1 gigabit network in many areas across the metro. 1 gigabit is equivalent to 1,000 megabits per second, up and down speed. And one of the variables that we've used in making the selection of where we're building that is in fact where there are currently slower speeds in the market. So those residences that for whatever reason got effectively leapfrogged in the technology evolution, many of them are going to be getting the fastest speeds first in terms of the new gigabit technology, of which PRISM can be deployed over it. And then others that currently have the kind of the newer generation of DSL will also be enabled for PRISM service if they have the 25 megabits per second or faster. And that does require what we call grooming. It requires some work on our network to make that happen. because a video signal is much more sensitive than just even good old-fashioned internet or voice services are. So there's a couple of factors involved in terms of how we are deciding where to build out, but one of them clearly is the variable of where are the lowest speeds now, because we've got to get them to where they can be faster. And what that all does becomes a bit of a flywheel. To the extent we continue to be successful with PRISM, that creates the revenue and the penetration that allows us to get more capital into the market, to continue building out, to continuing to get greater internet speeds. Because as we all know, the video world is in evolution right now, with over-the-top video services, the likes of Netflix and Hulu and many other services. There's a lot of things going on, but the common denominator to whether it's a service like Comcast or PRISM offer or some other future service, the common denominator is high speeds to the home. And so that's kind of a collateral benefit of getting this kind of franchise in place, as it helps drive further investment on our part into more residences.
One of the questions I have is, in your application, you talk about PRISM would be made available to approximately 15% of the member cities. I didn't see the word each member city in there. To me, that's a critical word.
The 15%.
15% of the aggregate of 9 cities, or 15% of each individual city?
It would be each individual city. So the franchise would say, and just to give you an idea, let me just give you an idea what our track record is. Because I know you look at that number and you say 15% of the city, but if it would help, just to let me tell you what we've done in other markets. Correct, in South Denver, we have 8 franchises where we've agreed to a minimum build of 15% that's tied to further investment. It wouldn't reach the 27.5% penetration rate. In Centennial, which is, we agreed to 15%. We filed our first quarterly report, we're at 90. In Denver, we agreed to 15%. The mayor signed the franchise on Wednesday. We were at 15% on Thursday. In Parker, we agreed to 15%. We were at 65%. So what we do is, once we need to set that bar, because the investment's not going to be the same in every city, but we've gone well above that benchmark wherever we've deployed. So our track record is.
Why that wasn't clearly spelled out in the application?
We'd be happy to submit that into the. I think partly was when we filed the application. I'm not sure those first reports from the initial franchises in Denver had been made public. Anything that's been made public that's a trade secret that we filed in another franchise.
So
or
we are talking each.
Correct.
City.
That's correct. Wherever we have a franchise, that percentage would apply to that city.
Okay, all right, good.
Yeah, got a question. You, correct me if I'm wrong, you said you agreed to 15% at Denver, the mayor or the governor signed it, and the next day you were at 15%?
Correct.
Including how many people you have there already, and the ability just to flip the switch and, okay, I met that mark, so you're saying that's part of your market plan, or are you gonna say, I've already account for this 15%, I'm gonna do 15% on top of that, so that would be 30% versus.
So here's the way the agreement, I think the best way to kind of describe the way the agreement works, if I may. We agree to a minimum build of 15% within a time frame, and then we sit down with the city on the anniversary date and say, what does our deployment look like? The idea that we would be well above 50%. So let's use, if I can use Parker as an example. Let's say on the 3rd anniversary, we sit down with the city of Parker and we're actually at 65% built, which I think we'll be past that, but let's just use that as a number. Then that would become the benchmark. Then when we sell into that 65% and reach a 27.5% penetration threshold, that would trigger an additional 15% investment within 2 years. So once we meet that, we would have a 2-year time frame to go from 65 to 80. Now the reality is, once we sell into that, we've probably already gone from 65 to 80, but that's the way the contract works, if that helps explain it.
I mean, it explains it, but it seems like you already, I'll agree to that percentage, but I already know that I'm there.
That's right.
That,
Because
It's really the
every,
ladder effect.
it is the latter effect. Every city's going to be different. Not every city's going to be there on day one. Denver's a little bit unique that we've had the head end built there for 7 years because we had a video product previously. So as we deployed gig, the availability was much quicker. Here we've Minnesota's a little different. We had to make that investment that was made in Denver 10 years ago. But the reality is we plan on going well above the 15%, but we need to set that bar pretty consistently, or because once we go to 20, that becomes the floor. Then if we say, okay, in your city, we're actually going to be at 70%, so we're going to agree to 30, then every Comcast city becomes 30 because they're going to file a letter saying, well, they agreed to this here and they agreed to this there. We can't agree. Every city is going to look different. Some cities may be at 40 initially, some may be at 60, some may be at 35. So we kind of have to set a one common denominator, or we run the risk from a precedence perspective of that getting used against us.
So how about looking at a percentage of existing capability in houses that may already have your service and the ability to give PRISM once you turn it up, and looking at a new build community that is just right now dirt lots and customers are going in to either build houses, or most of our cities have large developments that are going in.
Yeah.
And I look at Brooklyn Park, I see south of one particular street, 85th, you have a pretty good precedence for customers. Then you go north of 85th, and then you go north of 610, you're so sparse, at least on the maps that we've shown, that it doesn't look like you even have the capabilities of providing a customer. Though I can look out my window and see that the neighbor has a satellite dish, assume that it's CenturyLink. So do you guys have a precedence where you say, old build, existing customer capability, this is our percentage, new build, we're going to go after those because that gets us into that
Well,
market?
this is a generic statement, but generally now in new, what we call greenfield, single-family development areas where they're building brand-new houses and/or multi-dwelling unit developments, we are building fiber all the way to the lot and to the condo or the apartment, if you will. So we are using the same technology that we're using to enable the gig service anywhere where there's new development. And over that, of course, you would then be able to offer PRISM. So that's how we're handling all new builds going forward. The challenge has always been using DSL technology is how do we get the speeds to areas that are less dense. And so we're continuing to try and make that happen. And as I said, really the threshold is that 25 megabits per second speed. So if we can enable 25 megabits, and there's some new technologies that are allowing us to kind of double the speeds today that are in place, literally double them, that we're trying to deploy that so that could get to areas that you might be describing that previously might not have had the speeds and therefore also not the ability to get PRISM service, but in the future will be able to either through that new DSL technology I'm referring to or through the building of the gigabit networks.
And I think to follow on what Tyler said, I think you're asking from a contractual perspective, we have not made the distinction in the contract between old versus new. And, and I know a lot of your areas have new development. What that would do, though, is it changes the denominator. So in cities that are landlocked, where there's probably not a lot of new houses, whatever we're building against is going to be stagnant. If a city has 10,000 homes today and they pass a planned development for another 1,500 home development, then the denominator would now be 11,500. And if we actually are able to get in there and say there's a bulk deal or we win the contract on that and we get a really high penetration rate, that would just increase our odds of getting to the 27.5%, requiring further build. But to your point, I don't think we have not signed an agreement where we make a distinction on how we serve new brown versus greenfield.
Jody?
I think the need for competition is big. I know on some of our neighborhood blogs, people are very frustrated with Comcast. They have nowhere to go. They want a choice. The one thing I am concerned about, though, is the plan for finishing the cities, and the build out. Because if I was able to have it, Julie couldn't have it, it'd be very frustrating if you're the one having problems with the only choice that you have. And I think that we have to make it very clear to our communities that this is an expensive endeavor, and it is not going to be available to everyone, but we need to give them some type of understanding, timeline or whatever, so that they know, because I do think it could be frustrating to those who are already having problems and would love to change, but it could be many years down the line. And so I think that's really important. I would hope that people would pay attention. They don't all pay attention until they need something, you know, but I think it's very important that it's not just going to be, oh, in 2 years it's all going to be built out and everybody will have a choice.
And that's the beauty of competition. You know, that's why, in our opinion, when you have a competitive marketplace, the market is going to control that. So as we come in, rather than say, you know, okay, the city's imposed a build-out, which is a second entrant we can't agree to, and I assume no one else can, because there's still only one cable operator in the Twin Cities, that, you know, if people are that frustrated with the incumbent, then we'll do well. And we're finding that in areas that we've launched. And so I think what you tell your constituents is, of course, it's not going to be available to everyone on day one. That's not the case. But what happens is, even those places that it's not initially available to, if the incumbent reacts, which they do, and we've seen them react in other markets we've launched, everyone's going to benefit right away. Because, you know, they can't market to 4th Street but not 5th Street. We just don't work that way. So even the areas we're not deployed initially, once we have a substantial beachhead, everyone's going to benefit. And if people are truly frustrated, then it's going to happen quicker than we ever anticipated. And that's what makes the market a really neat thing.
Let me just ask you one more question. Technology always seems to be changing.
That is true.
And so you come in and with the current technology, but something big comes that we might not know today, how would you handle that to those as you're building on with the ones that you've already put in? Are they upgraded with that technology, or do you, with this timeline, how does that work?
Yeah, John, I don't think any of us really know what the future holds. Every time we think we do, it changes. But I think one of the things that is as I stated earlier, is a common denominator to all this is the insatiable demand for bandwidth. And so there are challenges with both copper/DSL technology as well as coax technology that have physical limits. And the thing that is really future-proof is fiber. We're talking about a 1 gigabit build to households. I have customers in this city, business customers, who are running at 100 gigabits per second today. And so the ability for fiber to handle enormous amounts of speed and capacity is pretty protected in terms of a pretty long runway in terms of what that can happen. As the content medium and the delivery of that, whether it's a multi-channel service like the cable operators have offered or Prism offered, how that evolves versus all the over-the-top things that are happening with, as I said, the likes of Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime, and there's a lot of them. It's interesting as the buzz for that is kind of building, when you start looking at, what that really means in terms of having to buy all those piece parts, and they're kind of disaggregated in terms of the user experience. So we don't know where that's going to go from an industry perspective, but the common denominator is the high-speed internet access, that everything, the Internet of Things is kind of the buzzword out there right now. Your thermostat and your security system and your toaster and your refrigerator and everything will have internet access. And video is just another application over that. So as that evolves and as that all becomes, we don't know, but CenturyLink is built the Prism platform because of its architecture. As I said, for example, we really have almost limitless HD channels. We have 250 today. That's the most in the industry. And as we add the other features, I talked about picture-in-picture. We currently have 4 picture-in-picture. We have 4 simultaneously whole house DVR channels. We're currently testing that that's going to turn into a larger number. And when that happens, that'll be automatically deployed to everybody. So there's some built-in kind of future proof of the underlying internet architecture. The product Prism itself is kind of a self-growing, self-enabling solution, and then as we're prepared for anything else that might happen over all of that.
On Tuesday, Golden Valley, we voted to have one trial section because in Golden Valley, we have an ordinance that all cables have to be buried, but we're changing that to allow the 1 gigabyte or what in a test area, and it will go on the poles because in backyards it's a little harder to go around fences, but we didn't want to, we wanted to move forward and with this, so we're giving a little leeway there to that.
We
but
appreciate that.
It's a start.
Yes, it is.
But already I was telling my son about it last night. He goes, "When am I getting it?" No, you know.
I live in down near in the inner part of Denver, and I've had it for 6 months now. The gig in the Prism, I was a friendly. I told the GM down there I was kind of hacked off. We got the franchise because now I have to start paying. But it is an incredible service. It's really neat.
Yeah,
So-
but to your point, one of our challenges is the expectation setting. There is such, as we've been going around to all the cities and the cable commissions in the greater metropolitan area, I can say with pretty high confidence, there's not been a single person who has said, we don't want you to come. That is a universal truth, and the constituents out there are the same story. So there is a pent-up demand, but unfortunately, the ability, the capital involved to do this to a 100% is, there's not enough capital anywhere to do it, and couldn't do it fast enough in the Minnesota winters. And because of the volatility of the market, we are, as Jim said, we're starting with 0 customers. We have to earn every one, and there's no guarantees, and that's why we've got to kind of earn our way. And if we're successful, then we'll continue to invest, because clearly our goal would be to, the more homes that can get it, the more customers we can ultimately secure. So we have a common goal, for sure.
So when you say you don't have enough capital to kind of ramp up all of the areas that was in a community, and you said nobody does, well then how did Comcast, I've only been here 3 or 4 years, but
So
they had the money to ramp up.
Well, when
100%.
Comcast signed their franchise, it was an exclusive franchise, and so they were the only game in town. And so you can contractually agree to that if you're guaranteed 100% market share. We had the same requirement. We still do, in fact, have the same requirement in the state of Minnesota to provide voice service to anyone who asks for it. Because when we received our certificate to do that, we were the only game in town. I guess if you look at second entrants, unfortunately, the other portions of this industry are light years ahead of video. That's why you have 40 telecom providers in Minneapolis. That's why you have 40 internet providers and 1 cable provider. When Tyler says we don't have the capital, obviously you can't. What you're asking, a full build out would be a contractual commitment to basically, let's say, building out the Twin Cities is in the probably
1.1 million households.
Yeah, so we're probably looking. It might have a B in front of it, or very high hundreds of millions, and to have a bunch of contracts that require that capital to be committed on day one without any customer base, when you have to acquire that customer from someone else, if you don't meet that 5-year requirement, you get $1,500 a day penalties. You have the potential for the franchise to be revoked. You're pulled in front of City Hall, kind of being told that you're in breach and you have to get out. That's the contractual commitment that we could not present to our shareholders. Our shareholders would say, why did you contractually? We may spend the $1 billion. If we get 40%, it may happen. That's the beauty of the market. When Comcast entered the phone market, they did a little bit at a time. And then it worked. And they took some of our customers, and then they took more, and then they took more. And now, again, they're probably a larger phone provider than we are in the Twin Cities. And that's the way competitive markets work.
Tony talked about the overhead lines. You looked at each individual city to see the percentage or amount of overhead versus underground. As a Maple Grove, everything is going to have to be underground.
Yes. Well, again, when we talk about building something new, and that being the gigabit, we are weighing the aerial versus buried plant. And so in different parts across the entire metropolitan area, we have combinations of aerial and buried. And so a lot of the gigabit is going to be aerial because we can get in quicker. The cost to put buried fiber into existing neighborhoods where we're digging up streets and curbs and people's yards and bidirectional boring and all the things that have to take place is extraordinarily expensive and disruptive. There are things going on in terms of construction techniques that may allow us to do that with less disruption and less cost, and that's under evaluation by the company right now. And we're also, as I said, we're taking advantage of existing buried DSL plant that's in place. So in those areas, again, where we already have the combination hybrid fiber and copper facilities that can deliver that 25 megabits per second, even if they're in a buried area, they'll be able to get Prism. So it's a kind of a combination of technologies and solutions.
Thanks.
My name is Dwayne Orn, and I'm actually a member of the Northwest Cable Board, and my interest principally at this point is the Community Access Corporation, and we do have a good relationship with Comcast, and I'm wondering if you could just describe what your viewpoint and attitude would be to community access and the facilities that we have here.
As far as the access channels and the government and the community channels
Well, there's even, maybe this is something.
Just the overall commitment. I know
Just to-
there was
Sure,
yeah.
There was a grant that was given in the last go-around, so the entire commitment from CenturyLink to this franchise authority in terms of what type of commitment you would.
Sure. I mean, obviously, from that perspective, we will mirror whatever PEG support requirements that the incumbents agree to. We obviously carry all the PEG channels. The good news is, we'll run a fiber feed into all these locations and deliver it in HD. And we've got a little different product than the incumbent. We do what's called a mosaic, which is pretty neat. That in fact, if you don't have to, you can live in separate cities and watch PEG content from other cities within the commission. So we actually offer the content. The content is available to every member. If you're living in one city, you can see all 7 cities government access channels, which is pretty neat.
Comcast does support us financially in addition to providing digital services to those areas.
So when
Is that part of then the contract negotiation?
Yeah, there is the PEG fee and then the franchise fee, which they, I believe, agreed to. I think the question mark at this point, what they don't agree to is that any upfront capital grants.
So the reason, and the FCC kind of addressed that in 2007. So when the incumbent provides a grant, they generally amortize that over the term of the franchise and they recoup that. So they have a subscriber base within which to do that. We do not. And so what the FCC in 2007 said, well, if you're going to provide any upfront grant, you have no way to recoup it from your subscribers. That said, there is a monthly access fee that we will collect and remit from each subscriber, which will mirror any other cable operator in the city. And we also agree that if it goes up, we'll follow them up. So that's something we would agree to. But with respect to the upfront grants, again, there's no ability to recover that like the incumbent has. Flip it to the phone side, if we had that same issue at the PUC, second entrants would never agree to that because they're like, well, CenturyLink had 100% of the market. They can recover that cost. We can't. There's no such grants. I mean, those don't happen at the state level. But that's the reason why the upfront capital is initially an issue for us. Now, the other thing we're agreeing to is a shorter-term franchise. So when we renew this, if we have a good subscriber base, it would be something that, that we could talk about in the renewal. Hopefully then we have somebody to recoup that from. That's the idea.
Dwayne, you were referencing then the 200,000 that
Right.
Comcast provides. Right. Yeah, if you're going to be investing 500 million or $1 billion, seems to me 200 grand is not going to be that difficult for you to provide. Anyway. Yes, sir.
My question may be for Adrian, actually. Assuming we go forward and these fine folks don't do anything or several things they promised to do at some point in the future, what protections will we have built in to deal with that?
Well, the franchise does include very specific requirements, performance review requirements, performance bond requirements, and so on. And you always reserve the right to make a finding that they are in non-compliance with the franchise, and one of those decisions could mean that you could actually terminate the franchise. If, franchise provisions under the existing franchise with Comcast, for example, under Minnesota law, and frankly, even the FCC requirements give you a local authority a great deal of authority to ensure that they do perform what they commit to under their contract. He said it is in fact a contract. It isn't just some kind of a license. It's something that you as a party to the contract can enforce their obligations and their commitments. And there will be a lot of provisions in the franchise to deal with that.
Does that also trickle down to the customers that leave Comcast for CenturyLink? And then if they lose their franchise, to say, well, they sign a monthly bill agreement that they would provide service while they can no longer provide it. Does that clients either recruit, transition to the competitor, or they still get what they were paying for the duration?
Well, frankly, if they're out of business, then they can't provide service or whatever. The fact that they would have a subscriber agreement to provide service to them, there wouldn't be much to enforce.
Okay.
But they'd always have the option, for example, if Comcast is still here or some other providers here, to simply subscribe to that service. Or nowadays, in this day and age, there's a lot of other kinds of service options as well, including satellite service, Wi-Fi services, and so on. I would like to comment a little bit because a number of the folks have been asking questions, and you hit the nail on the head too, when you talked about the Minnesota law and a 5-year build-out. I think what these folks are trying to get clear, and Joni did and George did as well, that they're trying to understand or get a better picture of how you're going to build out and when service might be available to people. And as I stated, Minnesota has this law that has a specific build-out time of 5 years. But then you make the statement that the FCC rules say that wouldn't be applicable, but the provision under the FCC's orders of build-out when it's reasonable to do so. That's the terminology that's used in the FCC order. Well, that's somewhat nebulous, so and not real clear. So let me pin you down if I possibly can, because I think it'd be very helpful for this group to understand that. So if you build out 15% of this system, okay, now there's two things that can happen after that. What you might call the line extension policy, how you're going to extend to a new area. You stated that once a year, you as a company, you're going to evaluate, build out an extension of your system. That's one option. The second line extension policy is, let's say that a neighborhood, and I think George was getting at that a little bit, request service or request extension. So do you have an extension policy that says when people or a neighborhood or group would like to have your service extended to their area, you'll do so based on X% of the households asking you to do so? Or don't you have such a policy? And then secondly, if you are evaluating it on a yearly basis, what would be the criteria or the things that would trigger your extending the system? So in other words, there's two things. People requesting extension, what would you have to know or have in order to make a decision to do so? And secondly, if you're doing an annual evaluation, what are the criteria that you would consider before you would extend the system? So I mean, in place of the 5-year thing, which is specific, and I think Joni was getting at that, if you're not specific, if it's just reasonable, well, what is reasonable? What's the definition?
So, Adrian, first of all, we evaluate it much more than yearly, and we're happy to sit down with you much more frequently to evaluate how we're doing in your respective cities, obviously. I think the answer to your question twofold. One is what we would put in a contract, and one is what we would do from a marketing perspective. I'll start with the contract. When we agree to a minimum of 15%, again, we fully plan on going well above that, and I think I told you the precedence issues we have on stair-stepping that up. From a marketing perspective, when you have new developments, a lot of that's going to be handled by the developer. So if you have a developer that does 1,500 homeowners planned unit development, they're going to try and get a provider in there. Now, there are no exclusive deals, I get that, but you'll have either a bulk deal or a preferred provider deal that either us or the incumbent get. And so then the question is, if let's say we are able to secure a 1,500 unit development with a bulk deal where the video pricing, the internet pricing is part of the homeowners association, it doesn't make sense for any competitor to go in there because nobody's going to pay twice. But if we do get that, I think we'd probably be to 100. We'd probably be telling the developer, every unit that gets built, we will have to go to. So a lot of that will be handled between us and the property owner.
But realistically, there's not going to be a whole lot of what you might call new development, or developers asking if you have 80% of the host. 80% of the 9 cities is probably already built up.
Okay.
So it's frankly going to be existing areas, homeowners wanting to have your service.
Okay.
I mean, a new developer, that would be one thing. That's a little bit.
Sure.
That's not as big a deal, for example, as extending to areas that already exist beyond where you are initially serving.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about new development. So existing brownfield development, and I'll let Tyler jump in. Here's some of the factors we look at when we're deciding where to deploy. One is cost to deploy. So you look at the price it costs you to acquire a home. As Tyler said, initially that aerial plant is less expensive than having to bore through the street. So that's one criteria. The other criteria is density. If you're going to build, if you're going to deploy a mile's worth of fiber, you'd rather pass 1,000 homes than 10. Ironically, it's kind of funny that one of the red herrings that we experience with this typical provider across the country is the discrimination, the redlining, the lack of development in certain areas. Those are the most dense, highly populated areas, and probably the ones we want to target the most with the video product. And I think, as Tyler said, the initial deployment is targeted to those highly dense areas. So we're looking at cost to deploy, how many homes we can hit initially, and getting the biggest bang for our buck for that initial capital investment. Then, with respect to triggering initial deployment, from a contractual perspective, the agreement will state that once we reach a certain penetration rate, we would be required to advance on that at 15%. So if we're at 50, we go to 65, and then once we hit the penetration rate there, we go to 80, then to 95, and you build out. The reality is, if we meet on the anniversary date and we're at 50%, if Tyler has 28% take rate, he's already building. He's not waiting for you to say, okay, you hit your penetration rate, you got to hit the next 15%. At that point, we have a return on our investment. He's already going. And I'll let you step in. I don't know if
I think you've said it pretty well. It's all those variables that he described in terms of where do we have our existing facilities. If we can do a little bit more, we've gone to some area, and the marginal investment to do a little bit more, and we can pick up another area. It's going to be better than if we have to go to some area we haven't even touched before. It's the simple economics of business that we have to consider in all of this. And one of the challenges, to I think the second half of your question of, if people come to us and say, we want you to come, and it's a brownfield area in particular, the challenge with that is a little bit to Joni's comments earlier is, if we said, everyone get together and raise your hand, and if you do, we'll come, everybody will raise their hand. And we simply can't go everywhere. So that's
Initially, I mean, you could.
Initially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't initially do that, nor could you put in a contract, we will have the entire city built within 5 years. Because if
Right.
we build, let's say we build to 50%, and let's say our take rates, we can't get above 10%. Well, we're doing something wrong. Either it's not priced properly, our service isn't as good, so we have to regroup and figure out how to sell better. And, you know, that's Tyler's job. If we're at 30%, as I said, we're already built. We're already building past any thresholds. We're going to be ahead of any contractual requirement if we're successful. So I think what you're going to find, Colorado Springs is an example. We agreed to the same model. We met the first year. We established our rate. We met the second year, and they just said, forget it. You guys are moving way faster than this contract allows. And so I think what you're going to find, the reality is, as we're successful, we're not going to be sitting there waiting, saying, oh gosh, we're going to get a call from the city to expand. We're already doing it. And that's what a competitive marketplace does.
So what you're basically saying is you build out this 15% initially, and then you have to determine success of that 15%. In other words, how many people or households or penetration you have from that in that initial 15% area would trigger, or be one of the factors that would trigger your extending to adjacent areas.
Correct. That's correct.
What it boils down to?
Yes.
Correct.
And the 15% is a minimum. I mean, I point out that if we meet on the anniversary date that we're required and we're at 50, that becomes the denominator. The 15% would be the minimum contractual requirement.
I think the big question here too is there are unknowns. We're not gonna have answers. But if we don't go forward, what are the consequences? We're giving people choice. We are going to make people happier, cost-wise. At the end of the day, when there's competition, that helps also. And so there's a lot of positives too.
I think to follow up, there was a quote from a city council that approved a franchise recently. They all melded together. I can't remember what city it was, but the council person, obviously this was an issue. This has been an issue, and the build-out issue is an issue anywhere we're competing against Comcast. Any other provider, it's not an issue. They let the market control, but they said, look, we understand it's a contractual. As you said, there are unknowns. And I think the quote was, I know we can't guarantee competition to everyone on day one, but if we can't do that, we ought not make it zero. And I think you're exactly right. And the market controls this, and the market works. And if you look at you look at telephone and internet, the market in this area actually works.
You know, we had a big discussion in Golden Valley, which I know some other cities have had, on garbage hauling and having a single hauler or having a choice. And boy, our residents, they want choice, and they bought signs and everything. But they like the idea of competition, and that if they're not happy and not getting the service from one, they do have a choice. And things are so expensive today. Even 30 years ago when this all started, things were a lot cheaper. And we weren't as built up as we're now. There's different things that have come into play, but sometimes you have to take the risk to get the change.
Competition is good. Every business has the right to fail. Bill?
George.
Well, Bill, I thought you had.
We're often confused.
Sorry, I thought Bill had his hand up.
He did.
Bill, go ahead. Actually, Chair Mattson, you indicated in an earlier question that initial 15% would be 15% in each of the 9-member cities. As we go forth, if we go forth and negotiate, any growth percentages would also, I would only support it if all member cities had the same growth percentages applied to them in the future.
Are you talking about the penetration rate? That's been pretty consistent. We've done this probably in 25 franchises.
And I say that, and that comment's partially driven by your earlier comment just a few minutes ago about some of the growth or penetration is based on your ability to sell and market. that's not our problem.
That's right.
I want that parity for all 9 member cities. Okay.
Yep.
And then my point was, just getting back to where I started, because of the fact that I hear you saying there's this big computer in the sky called the president that's going to keep us at 15% and 27.5% according to the template. I haven't heard anything different than that. It's important to me as we go forward to see what fruits in the pudding you already have. So you have a number of different similarly situated franchises that are in competition with Comcast, and you have some public information. And I'm not trying to get trade secrets, but as we are in the negotiating process, I would want to see in the greatest detail possible, given the fact that some of this is public information, what has been the pudding that you've had so far. That would give people some comfort in knowing that, oh, look, on 17 occasions, day one, we were at 16% or whatever.
Sure.
It happens to be.
And that's a great point. Not only would we do that, the way this process works, so once we get the approval to negotiate franchise, we will start meeting with the individual cities, and we will show you a map. So we'll have a map for each city that shows what our initial deployment looks like, and that's where we've been able to develop a lot of comfort with councils across the country as we say, look, we understand it's 15%, but here's where we're going to deploy, and then they can say, okay, well, that's an area that's well below the median income. It's good you're deploying there. Obviously, I understand, this may be underground, more expensive, and it's a lot higher than you're going to. So we will not only show you history from other cities, but also demonstrate what we plan to do very specifically in your city.
And maybe with numbers, because we sort of saw those maps already, but you can probably get from each city the number of households there are and percentages that go along with that particular city.
Yes.
As we move forward and move into the next thing, something I'd like you to consider when we get into the negotiation piece. I mean, I see the schools on here, and I know there's different ways to invest. You can financially invest in the infrastructure and stuff to get your product out there. But what I would like you to think about is how you might either use your technologies to enhance our schools, or use our students that are currently either in the fiber optic or telecommunication skill set, how you might bring them into your the ability to say, hey, you know what, Hennepin Tech, we've got 100 people, we would like to use some and give them some OJT or some intern training or something as you build out to reinvest into each one of the cities. I know I would feel comfortable standing in front of the Broken Park commissioners and the City Hall saying, this is what they plan to do, this is what they want to do. I think it'd be the right thing. So just something to think about when you reach that next phase of how to reinvest.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, one thing we don't want to lose track of is the customer itself. Kind of one question, 2 parts. In terms of customer service, this commission deals with a lot of customer service. We field customer service calls, and I'm sure that what level of buildup will you do in terms of your customer service commitment as you start entering the market, and how do you will that be local customer service representatives, or will it be offshore? And secondly, when you're building out or doing any new construction, this is way prior to Comcast, but we had, when this system was first built in the early 80s, we had contractors digging up the streets in the northwest suburbs, and they were from all over the country, and they simply didn't care what they were doing, but they just made a total mess of the process. So between regular customer service and construction, tell us how you would handle that.
Well, in terms of regular customer service, as I stated, we offer PRISM in 14 markets currently. So we have domestic call centers that are already set up supporting Prism customers today. And so it's simple. So we've got the systems in place. We've got everything already running and have been for years. So it's simply a question of scaling up the physical resources to be able to handle the incremental volume of the new markets. And so that's kind of in the sense of the billing systems and provisioning and trouble management systems and everything involved here. So we're not new to the customer service piece of the equation. We're simply scaling it and getting it ready for the Twin Cities market. With regard to the field resources, as I also said, we've got, I currently lead a team of about 700 technicians across just Minnesota, about 500 of which are in the Twin Cities. We are adding to those significantly. George, a little bit to your comment, we literally have job postings out there. If you know of people or people in technical colleges who are interested in getting into that kind of thing, there are jobs available today, not just internships, but the real deal. So we are taking those existing technicians. A lot of the skill set is the same skill set. Because this runs over the internet protocol, the technicians we already have in place today are already expert in that area. So part of the equation is already solved in terms of the plant itself. The other piece is kind of the inside, the Prism product itself. We have established a training lab, a technology lab. It's already up and running. We're already sending technicians through everything. Some of my technicians here, when some of the other adjacent markets were launched, we sent them there to help. So we already have a lot that are already trained. So we are in the process of ramping up the training of the local technicians as well as the capacity of the call centers. With regard to your comment about the build-out, keep in mind that I think we use the word build-out a little loosely because of the law and so on. But what we're really doing in many respects with the existing fiber and copper hybrid network is we're enabling it. So we're not physically constructing something new in the ground with regard to that network. We're doing some tweaking at the electronics that enable it to carry the video service. With regard to the new gig build-out, again, as I stated, that is almost exclusively aerial at this point. So yes, we do have many contractor crews in the marketplace today that are hanging aerial plant. So that is not disruptive, again, to the roads. For the most part, we have to do some interconnectivity, and there'll be some work there. But that process of permitting and right-of-ways, that falls under everything that we as I'll say the legacy telephone company and internet provider have had in place for years. So our engineering, construction, and planning teams are very adept at working in that environment. And obviously we've got to do the kind of build out that we're talking about. It simply isn't possible with our existing employee team. And so we have to use contractors to kind of handle the bubble that is this build. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and then will there be any commitment of some local representation that local franchise authorities can contact? I'll just give you an example. Last summer we had a situation in Maple Grove where there was some underground issues in terms of where pedestals were put, so forth and so on. And there were multiple pedestals in the area, and some were Comcast, some were CenturyLink. And I was able to take care of the issues with Comcast, but I didn't even know who to call at CenturyLink because we had a the Townhome Association was extremely upset that this one pedestal was tilted like 45 degrees, but certainly Comcast can't take care of a CenturyLink problem. So how are we the liaison to handle something like that?
They're sitting right behind us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. We hadn't had a relationship with the cable commissions for obvious reasons in the past, but we certainly try to have relationships with local city governments, and that is a path is with Kirsten and others to resolve those kinds of issues, because snowplows do tend to take those things out in Minnesota all too frequently.
We will make sure that as part of this, whether it's a permitting issue with you will have one neck to choke, and we'll make sure we get it taken care of.
Ellen?
Just to wrap up a few things,
I was glad to hear an answer to Al's question that you're looking at 15% in each city of all 9 cities. I didn't think, at least to my eye, in the city of Plymouth, which I represent, the maps didn't look to be 15%. They were pretty small, but I also recognize those maps were not real detailed. And then the other thing, going back to what Mike was saying about customer service, in the application, the CenturyLink call centers are staffed 8 to 6, Monday through Friday. And then it says, addition calls are handled by agents on Saturday and Sunday, and you also use outside vendors. Are all of those domestic call centers when using outside vendors? Just gets, and that's always been a huge issue for us. And I think you guys know with all cable services customers.
Yeah. Yes, they are all domestic.
Okay.
And but we do use some outside vendors just again to handle scale. With the ebbs and flows of call volume, it's virtually impossible to staff to 100% as volumes go like this. So like most businesses, we supplement with outside vendors who can take care of those valleys, or the spikes, if you will.
Anything else? Any commissioners? Anybody else from the audience?
I, for one, am very excited for the constituents that I represent and the opportunities that competition to this particular marketplace is going to bring. I'm also very excited because my community, Osseo, probably being one of the smallest ones here, is totally an aerial city. So we start listening and hearing about things, and I know that we have had some initial dialogue with Osseo, and we have a huge CenturyLink hub in Osseo. So for me, on a little bit more selfish note, I'm very excited about that opportunity to prioritize that. I think competition is good. I think that, you know, the criticisms that we all hear and have heard on this commission and out amongst our people is going to be helpful for Comcast, and it's also going to be helpful for CenturyLink as well. One of the factors and the things that we focus on in this commission quite a bit at many of the meetings is looking at the market shares and the survivability of this commission. I think bringing and of this enterprise. So I'm excited to look at this. I urge and encourage the executive committee to really try to focus on ways to make this happen, looking at it as a proactive negotiation versus going backwards, and trying to be less restrictive with trust, but also some opportunities for us to maybe back out of the franchise if, in fact, kind of check and balance system for performance for CenturyLink. I think it's a great opportunity, and like I said, I just encourage the executive committee and the negotiating committee as we go ahead to try to find ways to bring this to the table, because it's going to help everybody, and ultimately it's going to help all of our residents, and it's going to increase a positive customer experience for everybody because we'll be forced to bring it that direction.
Anything else from the other commissioners? Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you very much for your time.
Exciting opportunity, I think, for all of us. And look forward to working closely with you. So,
Likewise.
entertain a motion to close the public hearing. We'll leave the comment section open until Friday at 4 o'clock. So I have a motion to close the public hearing. Motion is made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.